how much soil should I cover the stems in the pot? How far buried should the stems be? The idea is not to have your plant buried so deep that you're covering the stem and you're covering the petioles. The idea is just to have your roots buried below the soil. The more stem and petioles you have beneath the level of the soil, the higher chance you put your plant into a position where it could suffer from stem or petiole rot. Now, I don't want you to start panicking and start digging out your Monstera, because if it's been buried below the soil and it's been fine for weeks, months, even years, your plant is going to continue to be fine. If your plant was already in poor health, for example, it has a history of having the roots or the stem rot, then this can put you in a really dangerous position. But I don't want you to go panic, because last time I said your plant might wilt. That turned into a bunch of people assuming I said your plant is going to die. So I want to make it very clear that you don't need to panic. This is something that you should just know for next time. In the video I made where I talked about how to prevent root rot, you can see that I have a Monstera albo that did have a history of rotting, and I planted just the roots below the soil, and I have the stem actually hovering above. I'll include some footage of what it looks like. But the good thing about that is when your plant is small, you can just have something like a bamboo stake or even a chopstick to help balance your plant to make sure that it can stay above the soil level. You really don't need to do much if your plant is really healthy, really large, and already established. You can get away with having more of your plant potted below the soil. So right now I'm just trying to repot my Scindapsus pixis exotica. It's been about 2 years and it's going into a slightly bigger pot. I don't want to have this in such a huge container because it's just on a nightstand in my bedroom, so I like to keep it small. Now, my main goal here is to instill a sense of confidence when you're dealing with your plants. I do not want to instill a sense of panic, because that just doesn't make for very good content, and that's not how I want people to feel when they're watching my videos. So again, just keep this newfound knowledge as now I know for next time, and not something that I need to go rush out and start doing right away. When I'm potting up my exotica, I'm using basically the exact same kind of mix that I use for almost all of my aeroids, the typical mix of soil perlite, bit of horticultural charcoal, worm castings, and orchid bark. I really tend to just use the same stuff for everything. That way it's much easier for me to just keep watering my plants on a schedule that works for me. And you can see, once you start neglecting how your roots are doing, the soil was not so great for the last year, things start to fall out. Now, I could put this in water. The stem is pretty firm, but I'll probably just stick it back in. If it lives, it lives. If not, not a big deal. The leaf will turn yellow, and I'll just pull it out. Now, Scindapsus is really not one of my favorite types of aeroids. I do like the way the exotica looks. I do like the way the Argyrius looks, but other than those two, not a huge fan. Like the Moonlight or the other one, they grow super slowly, and a lot of them just look way too similar, especially something like a Moonlight when I already have a philodendron silver sword, so I don't need something else like that. The next question is, which planter, ceramic, mud, or clay is good for indoor plants? Personally, I don't think it matters what type of pot you put your plant in, as long as you have drainage holes and as long as you know how that pot is going to affect the rate of evaporation of water in your soil. So basically, if you go for something like terracotta, you should know that terracotta is porous, so water is going to escape this type of pot at a faster rate than plastic. Plastic is not porous, so in comparison, plastic is going to retain more water, terracotta is going to lose more water. If you want a plant that dries out very quickly, you want to go for terracotta. If you want a plant that you need to retain more water, you might also go for plastic. Now, Again, it really doesn't matter what you choose. I have monsteras in terracotta. I have monsteras in plastic. I prefer terracotta for establishing smaller plants, but once it gets to a larger size, usually plastic is a pretty good option because it's cheap and it's lightweight. When you talk about ceramics, that's basically terracotta or clay. Usually it's glazed. If the pot is glazed, then it's not going to release moisture. So you can treat a glazed ceramic or terracotta pot like you would a plastic pot. Now, I have this gigantic planter because I have these very large Monstera acacoyagoensis that have been growing fantastic under grow lights. The roots on these things have just been insane. So what I want to do is I want to put these plants on a big old stick. Of course, I'm going with the classic birch bark pole. This one is extra large, so I'm a little bit worried about the stability of it, but this pot is like around 7 pounds, so it should be very sturdy. We'll see how it goes. So first thing is I have to take out the roots of these. They've basically gone through the pot, and I might have to resort to cutting the pot out because they're just so wild right now. Now, whenever I grow my plants in leca, this is just something that happens, in part because I have extremely high light and the roots grow so fast I can't keep up with me taking the pot out, up-potting it, or rearranging the roots all the time. So this is just the end results of the difficulties with leca, especially if you have your plants for a long time and you're not using it to sell and get your plants in and out quickly. Okay, there's one. So this monstera has not yet been able to produce any kind of fenestrations, and it is kind of a more tricky monstera to have, although it grows super fast like an Adansonii. The main issue with it is that it needs extremely high amounts of light, and it does kind of take a long time for it to fenestrate. When it does start to fenestrate, the holes start off really small, but then it kind of explodes, and it reminds me of a Monstera esqueleto, which I really like as well. So with something to climb and the same amount of light, these plants should hopefully explode with their growth. So just like when you're attaching any climbing aeroid onto a pole, you have to look for the back of the plant. This is the back here. You got to check for the aerial roots. These are really helpful because there's two roots pointing in like a V direction like this. So you just want to make sure that it's all attached perfectly. Another reason why it's so important to attach your plant properly is because if you miss any of these steps as it grows, your plant could start to corkscrew, which makes it very challenging to string it up properly. So this one is done also. The next question is, I've always been told to separate roots that are pot bound. Is that not true? Like most things in plants, the answer is it depends. It does depend on the type of plant. It depends on the type of soil you're using, and it depends on what the root looks like. So if you have a plant, like for example, a Tradescantia, where the roots are super thin, it may be more beneficial for you to separate roots like this that are pot bound. I mean, this isn't very pot bound right now, but it might be beneficial for you to separate it, because when the roots are super thin, they can break easily, they can rot easily, and they may have an easier time establishing in new soil if they are separated. However, if you have a plant like a Monstera where the roots are super, super thick and have no issues pushing through basically any kind of soil, it doesn't really matter. For my Monsteras, I almost never separate the roots because I know that even if it is super, super pot bound, they'll just grow secondary roots from the outside most point of the pot. So you really don't need to take that extra time to separate them. On top of that, I use a super chunky soil mix, which leaves room for lots of oxygen to get in, lots of air pockets, and that makes it much, much easier for the roots to find new spaces in the pot. So it really does not matter that much if you separate them. I mean, you can separate them, but if you're just trying to save time, then you might as well just skip it. So I have these two different kinds of Tradescantia. This one is a Purple Heart. I'm not sure what this one is called, but I wanted to add some more stuff to the plant shelf that is usually behind me when I film. So I've bought these from a local nursery. I've made some cuts already, tried to root a few of them in water. Oh, this is kind of rotting actually. Uh-oh. That worries me a little bit. They were only a couple bucks, so if this is a failed experiment, then it's not a huge deal. Anyway, same thing with all my other soil. I just basically use whatever I have for my aeroid mix. I'm gonna pop them in together, and then hopefully they take. Because these are new plants, they are under quarantine. One of the plants that I bought from this store had mealybugs. Thankfully, it was still under quarantine. Kind of a long quarantine. I think it's been about almost 2 weeks now, maybe going on to 2.5 weeks. So I always take extra care to quarantine my plants before I introduce it to my collection, because I know what pests I have, and I really do not want to deal with another new pest. So while these get potted up, they're still going to be under quarantine until I am fairly certain that they do not have any kinds of new pests that I don't have in my collection already. And if you're wondering how to avoid pests, I do have some videos on pests, one on spider mites using beneficial bugs. I do talk about fungus gnats, and I am in the process of making a video about dealing with thrips. I'm not sure if that will be out by the time this comes out, but that's something else that I'm also working on. So with the Purple Heart, I just add these extra cuttings in, then I'll fill in the rest. Pests is something that everyone will have eventually. Usually it is extremely challenging to get rid of a pest infection completely. If you have more than, like, say 10 or 20 plants, it can be extremely challenging. So unless you are treating everything all at once consistently all the time, or if you live in the United States and you have access to some really strong systemic insecticide products, pest is something that you just sort of have to manage for the lifetime of your plant collecting. And remember that also, if you're ever getting into something like trades, you should do your best to disclose to whatever person the kind of pests that you already have. Do your best to spray them or treat them or whatever before they get sent out, because you don't want to get involved with introducing a new pest to someone else's great plant collection. That's just not the right thing to do. Anyway, I got these two potted up. Like the video if it was helpful, consider subscribing. See you next time.